With gas prices rising, you're probably seeing a lot more concerns from your customers about poor fuel economy. And if they drive a hybrid like this Toyota Prius, the problem may not be in the gasoline engine up front, but rather in the hybrid battery pack located near the rear. Would you know how to test this for your customer? Well, if not, stick around. That's the topic for today's edition of The Trainer. This edition of The Trainer is sponsored by Automotive. Be sure to learn more about the complete line of Automotive diagnostic equipment by visiting www.automotive.com. The Toyota Prius is the largest selling hybrid in the world and has been on American roadways for over 2 decades. And while many shops will take in hybrids to handle routine services like oil changes, brakes, and tires, not so many have embraced the challenge of tackling high voltage system diagnostics and repair. And you could be leaving some revenue on the table. One great example is the increasing need for replacement of the hybrid's high voltage battery pack. Like any other battery, these tend to wear with age, and as they age, the perceived fuel economy that the owner experiences tends to drop. Now, while there are specialized hybrid battery testing tools in the market, you can get a good idea of the condition of the battery using any quality aftermarket scan tool, including the Automotive MS919. Now, one of the first things, of course, that we want to do is a full system scan, just in case there's something going on in another module that could be affecting our customer's concern. And what's nice about the Automotive tool is it lists the modules out in a topology format. So you see all the modules that are on one bus are shown with different colors to tell you what bus they're on. And it can help when you're dealing with a communications code. So let's go ahead and get the fault scan. If it shows up orange like the ECM just did, there's codes stored there, and there's a little symbol there, I don't know if you quite see it, number 2, so there's 2 codes stored in that module. TPMS has codes. Green, they're good. Now what's nice too is we can use the Intelligent Diagnostics function. And let's just say we want to pull up, oh, well, we got the engine is random misfire. That should certainly give us a possible problem in terms of fuel economy. And it gives us TSBs, repair data, DTC analysis, gives us some potential repair tips. This is a feature I really like. If I want to use the scope to take a look at what's going on with the ignition, and I want to take, say, a comparison between the voltage and current using the primary, I can use this feature to pull up the scope module as part of the tool, and it's going to give me a sample pattern, set the scope up the way it needs to be set up in order to capture that data, and then I'm all set to go. Then there's some helpful tips in here. Another nice and fairly recent addition is the motor information system that's been added to the tool. All right, and now you see it's pulling up diagnostic trouble codes for P0300 to give me some help there. All right, we can also pull up the report, and this is what we want to give our customer and keep for our records. So we can see that which modules have the codes, and then we can identify exactly what they are. Of course, we've already found P0300 in the ECM. Here we've got some issues with the TPMS sensors, smart key antenna coil circuit issue, but that's in history, so that may not be a problem. Same here with the nav system. It may not be a problem. But yes, I want to keep the misfire codes in mind as we're diagnosing the fuel economy concern. All right, so with that all looked at, now we can back out and go specifically to the control unit that takes care of the hybrid battery pack. That's the hybrid control unit. So we'll pull that up. You can see it controls the drive force of the hybrid vehicle through the calculation of engine output, motor drive torque, and the generator drive torque. It's also responsible for monitoring the battery, looks at battery cell voltages, temperature, resistance, all in determining the charging needs of the battery pack. And we're going to take a look at live data. That's what we're interested in. Now you can see there's a lot here. It's engine and battery related. So one of the things I want to do is I'm going to keep an eye on engine speed when we're doing our test, and I'll explain that when we get to that. And then as you scroll through them, just kind of keep an eye on the data PID, see if there's anything that just stands out as being not the way it should be. Right. And we'll continue to scroll down here till we get to what I'm really interested in. All right, and here's the first set of PIDs that we're interested in. These are the battery block voltages. And you can see that there are 14 of them. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because it's a 28 modules made up of 6 cells each. The modules are paired together to form these battery blocks. Since it's 7.2 per module, then we're looking at around 14.4 baseline for the block. If it's fully charged, you may see it go as high as 17. If we see anything much below 13, that's a problem. So we're going to scan through them, and we're going to take a look at where they are, and I'm also going to kind of check them off for later. You know, when you're looking at your data PIDs, it's helpful to select just the ones you want, so you speed up the refresh rate of the data that you see on your screen. And you can see that some of the voltage levels are changing slightly. Now I'm going to look at the levels real quick, and what I'm looking for is a variance, if there's any more than a 0.15 volt variance between these cells. So I'm seeing either 1555, 48 seems to be the lowest. All right, so 48 and 55 is only 0.07. So it hasn't really reached that mark. If there is, then that's an imbalance in the battery pack. Hybrid battery packs need to have a balance between their cells, between their battery blocks. If not, that can cause some issues. So I don't see any of that there. So we'll continue on down. There's some other PIDs we want to take a look at, and that would be right here. We've got battery block minimum voltage and battery block maximum voltage. You can see that it ranges just what we looked at for the variance, 15.48 minimum, 15.55 maximum voltage in the cells. You're not really seeing it right now, but we're going to take a look here at the maximum minimum battery block numbers. In this case, the block number that has the lowest voltage is block number 7, and the highest one is on block number 1. And it's not unusual to see these change as one cell drops a little bit or increases a little bit. So right now they're pretty steady, but if you see them bouncing around from one number to another, don't lose any sleep over it. That's normal. All right. And now we're looking at the next thing I'm interested in is internal resistance. These are the internal resistances of those individual blocks. And just like having 14 blocks for voltage, we have 14 specs for resistance. I'm not going to check those off, but we are going to take a quick scan at them. You see that they're 0.023, high of 0.024. A good number for this battery pack is around 0.019. And it may not sound like a huge difference, but an increase in resistance in the battery module indicates wear in that cell. As it wears, it has a higher internal resistance, and it takes more to try to keep that cell charged up. So we want to keep that in mind. Not a perfect number, a little on the high side, so we're going to kind of keep that in mind. Let's see, what else do we want to take a look at? State of charge, we got status of minimum and maximum charge. They seem pretty good, around 50%. You never want to see one at 100%, and I think the lowest value, don't hold me to this, is somewhere around 30–40% is where that variance for that battery to stay in its best condition. We never fully, the thing I want you to remember here is we never fully discharge the high voltage battery pack, and we also never bring it up to a full 100% charge. Now you might notice a few other things here that I want to make you aware of. Cooling fan, very, very important that the high voltage battery pack be kept cool. There are some different ways of doing that. Some just blow air across it, and others have a dedicated AC going to it. Some can be liquid cooled, depends on the manufacturer and the model of the vehicle. But it's very important that they stay cooled. And what's not unusual in some of the older Priuses is that there's an internal duct in the vehicle, and especially if they got dogs or animals that ride with them, it's not unusual for those vents to become clogged or the blower motors become clogged. So this is just, again, something you want to keep an eye on or be aware of when you're inspecting these systems. All right, so we've got what we wanted to know. We're just going to show the selected. We haven't seen anything out of the way yet, so I'm going to go ahead and I want to actually do a loaded battery test. I want to put some stress on this battery and see how those voltages respond. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take engine revolution and I'm going to include that on a graph. Why engine RPM? I really want to know how long does it take before the engine starts to replenish the battery. If it's a healthy battery, I should be able to put a load on the battery for some time before the engine starts to recharge it. If the battery is weak, the engine is going to start much sooner. So I want this just as an indication of where I'm at on my graph. The other thing I'm going to take a look at, include in my graph, is the battery block minimum, excuse me, hit the wrong button, the battery block minimum and the battery block max. Whoop, that's the wrong one. Get rid of that. Go back to battery block max, that's the one we want. And then a nice feature here is I can merge those graphs. And we'll just select the ones we want to merge. Minimum, maximum. And now I've got them all on one graph. All right. And what I'm going to be interested in is the difference between the battery block minimum and the battery block maximum, the dark green and the red trace. Right now, they're on top of one another because there's so little difference. And again, that's not unusual when we're looking at this graph. Now, in order to load it, we want to do is we want to get the vehicle ready, and then we're going to put it in reverse and attempt to load the battery. All right, and you can see that in that case, the battery started pretty quick. Didn't get much of a load there, not as much as I'd like. There was no strain against the brake pedal whatsoever. Well, that's not a good sign. All right, so we'll put it in drive. We'll try that, see if that's any help. We have to let the vehicle engine cycle quit, so we'll let that run for a bit. And have not started to record yet on the data. We're going to go ahead and wait for the engine to stop. Let it get fully charged. And you can see the battery block. You see how they're picking up now. 17.2. Remember I said if an individual module may be as high as 8.5 volts per module, or a total of 17. So we're kind of a little over that. That's also not a good sign. All right, now the engine is now shut off, as you can see here on the graph. We're going to hit record at this point, and we're going to repeat the test. Foot is on the brake, and stepping on the reverse, not doing anything. Step on drive. And again, you can see that it started almost immediately. So I'm kind of interested in the numbers here to the far left. We're just going to see if we can bring that over and see it a little better. We'll just keep backing it up this way, because I'm just interested to see what those numbers drop to. Getting close. And what we're doing is we're bringing them here to the far right. We're looking at 15.7 minimum, 1606 max. See if it gets any smaller before or after. No. So 16.6, 16.75. So we use a high number there, 16.75, 15.7. That's a pretty big difference, right? 16.75 max, 15.7 min. That's very, very close, right, to our 1.2 volts. So we've got a problem here, but I'm not really getting a good load on the battery. I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take it outside the shop and try to do a few wide open throttle passes, and we'll see what kind of results that gives us. Let me stress a few other points about performing this test in case you want to try this in your own shop. Once the vehicle is engaged and ready, put one foot firmly on the brake, put it in reverse, and attempt to power brake the vehicle. We want to make sure the engine is not running during this test, or it's not going to be an effective test. If the engine does start running on your initial attempt, let it run until it shuts off, bringing the battery up to full charge, and attempt it again. If that fails, try like we did, in the drive mode. And if that doesn't work for you, you may have to do like I did. Take it on the road and do a couple of wide open throttle tests in order to load that battery down. Well, I'm back from the test drive, so what do you say we access the data that I captured, see what it has to tell us. I'll start by going into the data manager and then review data and select the file of the test that I want to review. In this case, I've actually taken a few snapshots so that we can share it even easier. So we'll go to the image file and take a look at those. Here's the one I want to call your attention to. Let's take a close look at the battery block minimum and maximum voltage levels that this test gave us. So let's zero in on the values for battery block minimum and maximum. Upper number is the RPM. That was the engine RPM when it initially started up. But we achieved a minimum voltage of 12.86 and a maximum block voltage of 14.06. It's not hard to do the math, come up with 1.2 volts difference between those two numbers. That is right at Toyota spec for a bad battery. I want to be careful about interpreting these test results because the engine did start almost immediately during this series of tests. And one thing I did was take the data logs and looked at the voltages in every battery block individually to make sure that I was indeed interpreting this data accurately. And in all the instances, I was still seeing anywhere from a 0.9 to an over 1.2 voltage spread at any one particular time. I had to make sure that I was looking at the battery data right before the engine started and began recharging the battery. That's key in getting a good test result. Now, you won't see examples quite as spread as the one I'm sharing with you today. In some cases, there may be some smaller variances between your battery test results. Now, remember we said that we want to keep a minimum of 0.15 volts between battery blocks in order to be sure that the battery is in balance. So that's kind of a baseline minimum. We want to make sure we have at least that. But to gauge how much acceptable efficiency is left based on the voltage spread you get during your test, here's a chart to help you determine that and offer some advice to your customer. 0.20 volts, 100% acceptable efficiency. 0.45 volts, 75% acceptable efficiency. 0.70 volts, 50% acceptable efficiency. 0.95 volts, 25% acceptable efficiency. And 1.20 volts, like we had here, 0% acceptable efficiency. Any out-of-spec variation between the min and max voltage can be a contributor to lowered fuel economy because it's generally accompanied by an engine that starts sooner than it should. And the longer that ICE or internal combustion engine runs, the more gas it's going to burn. Another common reason for these lowered values on the Prius is a voltage drop issue caused by corrosion. The battery pack uses bus bars to connect the individual modules. And as I said, they can cause a voltage drop issue that can affect battery performance. If it is corroded, the contacts may be cleaned and or replaced, and then the battery then retested. In other instances, the battery may be able to be reconditioned. This is a process that involves cycling the battery pack through several discharge-charge cycles to balance the individual cell voltages. Now, one more thing. Before you go removing that high voltage battery pack, go back one more time and review the resistance PIDs for each of the battery blocks. This is a good indication of their condition. And if you recall, we saw values of around 0.024, 0.025 ohms. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's more than the 0.019 I'd prefer to see. If you do see one that's way higher than the rest, well, that's an indication that module is bad and it's going to have to be replaced and the high voltage battery serviced. Before you do that though, you're going to need specialized training so that you understand the service protocols and equipment that you're going to need to follow, and more importantly, the safety protocols that you'll need to adhere to. Fooling with high voltage systems is nothing to play around with. You can get seriously hurt if you don't know what you're doing. So I'm going to list some resources in this video's description that will help you get that needed training. You know, it's an exciting time to be a technician in this industry. Electric vehicles are growing. The future of the autonomous car is right around the corner. All of this coming to a dealer near you sooner than you might think. So embrace the future, embrace the opportunities. Get the training that you need and become the go-to shop in your market for hybrid and EV repair. And to find out how the good folks at Autel might be of help in that regard, be sure to visit www.autel.com. And as always, thanks for watching.